All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Do me a favor, folks. If you enjoy this show, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. All right. We are still in this first week of doing some new things here, with some technology behind the scenes. So we are still working out some issues. I almost was 100% on the ball there with the audio at the very beginning, but let's see. Let's see. It says the audio is going up and down. Let me see. Does that make it any better whatsoever? I don't know. Let me see. Let me know if I clicked on something. You won't be able to see it, but see, I got two people saying that or no, one person saying that the sound is going up and down. So you have to let me know. I'll be keeping an eye just to make sure. But yeah, there's some. I'm doing some new things behind the scenes here, because the new system that I'm using is completely different, but it's going to open up wider opportunities for me. So if I can just get it worked out, then I think we'll be all right. So let me know if you are experiencing any problems. I'll keep an eye on the comment section. All right. Today we are, yeah, good now. Okay. Just music during the intro. Okay. So I think I know what might be going on, but I'm not entirely certain. Anyway, nonetheless, we'll keep going. It seems like everything is good to go now. Today we're going to talk about Mark Zuckerberg. Well, more so about freedom of speech and platforms and how they're addressing it. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people get online and they just say some pretty terrible things. It's like something. It has to be addressed in some way, right? Like we have to either say, "Hey, we're not doing anything. It's a free for all. Everybody, you're at your own risk." Or we might say, okay, well, we want these kind of standards and these kind of limitations. And so it's a matter of what are those? And from my perspective, and I think we're not going to get what we believe we're going to get. So let's start with this post that Mark Zuckerberg made. Actually, you know what? I take it back. So let me give you a summary here. Mark Zuckerberg came out and he gave this 5 minute, we're going to walk through it. He gave a 5 minute post about, hey, here are some changes that we're going to be making on social media, on Facebook and on Instagram. And these changes sound very similar to how people currently experience X, or formerly known as Twitter. And so I was like, wow, that's very interesting. And the Babylon Bee, you don't know, they're it's a Christian satirical company. They just basically make satire and they basically make fun of everybody. So they had a post and they said something to the effect of, in honor of Mark Zuckerberg coming out talking about, changing how they do their, getting rid of fact checkers and stuff like that. We want to show, and they have like a list of like the top 10 times that Facebook fact checked their satire, their humor. Now, I'm not going to show you all 10. There's a link in the show notes, but I did want to kind of start off a little light and just kind of show you a couple of them because I thought they were a bit humorous. So let's see. Let me put that up on the screen. And there's for those that are listening just via audio, I will do my best to describe it as well for you. All right, so here it is. This first one that they put up, they put out, Ocasio-Cortez appears on The Price is Right, guesses everything is free, right? And it's got a picture of AOC on The Price is Right, and then below her, it says instead of like a number, a value that she guesses, it just says free. And so it's kind of funny, right? Like, yeah, because some of our members of Congress seem to think that things should be free. A lot of things, too many being anything more than zero. So here's the fact check that Facebook offered. And they highlighted fact check up there. And it says, did U.S. Representative Ocasio Cortez repeatedly guess free on TV show The Price is Right? That's literally they literally wrote that, like, that's the fact check, and then underneath it says, "Might be hard to, quote, come on down to, quote, the price is right if that's your only response." So, this is like a literal news story, and that's crazy because if you think about it, people are getting fact checked, right now demonetized. They were at the time, they were being kicked off of social media, and this is what the powers that be were delivering. Go figure. Here's the second one I'm just going to do too. Pope Francis says COVID vaccine will now be required to enter heaven. It's got a picture of the Pope. It's got a picture of, a vial of COVID-19 vaccine. Like, this was their joke. It's pretty clear that it was a joke, right? And look, even if sometimes jokes are good and they get you, you're like, wait a minute, what? Because it seems like it could be real. This one doesn't. But some jokes out there do. And for that, there are comments. Just wait a few minutes, go in there, and somebody who is caught on will tell you about it. So you don't need to actually you don't need fact checkers because we got the community, which we're going to discuss today. All right, so then the fact check was fact check. Satirical article about Pope Francis taken seriously. By who? Who exactly? And this was a Reuters fact check. So this wasn't some small potato company that's just trying to make a name for themselves or, trying to do more work so it seems like they're providing value. This was Reuters, a Reuters fact check back in 2022. And so they're like, look, the Pope didn't really say that. Okay. So I just thought that was kind of funny. And I wanted to give them a little bit of props for being so quick. I mean, let's be honest. I know they've taken some heat for various things that they've posted, but they can be pretty quick and they can be pretty sharp. So I appreciate the Babylon Bee for that. All right, so let's listen to this video of Mark Zuckerberg. So this is his video that he posted on Facebook and talking about upcoming changes to Facebook and the direction that they're going to go. So let's go.
Hey everyone. I want to talk about something important today because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today.
Okay, so let's pause real quick here. So I have there's a link in the show notes for the Georgetown speech. I encourage you to go listen to it. It's about 30 minutes roughly. And go check that out. But I'm going to play a clip here just a moment that I think is relevant to the direction of this particular episode. We'll see that in just a moment. But yeah, go check that out when you can. It's very interesting. All right, let's continue.
But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly.
Okay. So, did anybody else like catch that he put drugs, terrorism, and child exploitation in kind of like the same bucket here? He's basically saying these things are all the same, right? Or in some way equal, but they're not. And I don't want to, we don't want to dig too deep on this, but let me just say terrorism and child exploitation are both evils very clearly. Like pretty much, unless you're a terrorist or unless you are somebody that exploits children, chances are like 99.99% odds are that you believe both are evil, completely evil. Unless, again, you're one of the people that wants to engage in that kind of behavior. However, drugs, number one, he just says drugs. Like what he means to say probably is illegal drugs. I don't think he's talking about aspirin or ibuprofen, right? But those are drugs. Let's be clear. Those are drugs. He's probably talking about illegal drugs, which are drugs. Like if you want a meaningful understanding of what it means to be an illegal drug, that basically is a drug that the pharmaceutical companies either cannot, will not, or for whatever reason they're not selling, right? Like that's basically what it means. And in some ways, you might argue that it's competitive to them, right? Marijuana, for example. Other drugs, you could argue they don't really have any value, like I don't know, meth, right? Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I don't. I'm not very familiar with meth, so I can't say that there might be some value to it. But I'm going to go ahead and say probably not. But anyway, even if you talk about illegal drugs and then you further narrow it down to drug abuse, you are still talking about a health problem, and it's usually limited to an individual, maybe their immediate family. So I think it's kind of interesting that he puts all three of these in the same bucket. Just keep that in mind. All right, let's continue.
So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech.
Oh, so what it sounds like right there is not really so much, oh, I care about freedom of speech, because mind you, while I may be skeptical of Elon Musk and his approach to free speech and how much he talks about it, I think he has other motives in mind, and I wouldn't call them ulterior necessarily, but I think that he, as a billionaire, he had, I mean, he is very dead set on getting people to Mars and doing certain things. I think free speech is an avenue to accomplish his goals. He probably believes in it to some degree, but I don't think I'm not so convinced that he believes in the same way that people think that he believes in it. Um, but what Mark Zuckerberg seems to be saying here is that the winds have changed, and so therefore he is changing, because unlike Musk, who took a risk, and he told, I mean, we all saw the videos of him saying like, you know, go f yourself to major companies. I think he said it to like Disney, right? He said, "Go f yourselves." In he was in some he was on a panel or speaking somewhere, and that's what he, when he was asked about it, he told me, he's like, "Go f yourself." So he took a big stand after he paid like what $44 billion for the platform, like so he kind of put his money where his mouth was. Whereas Zuckerberg seems to be just going along to get along. Whichever administration is in office, that's the one that he follows. So I don't think this is a good start already, because it really sounds like you're like, what evidence is there that Mark Zuckerberg really believes in this to the point that he will, he will allow it to affect him, right? Like he didn't push back. Nobody recalls that. In fact, Facebook, in my opinion, was one of the worst places because again, they were fact checking satire like Babylon Bee. I don't recall like those that fact checking itself may have ended up on Twitter, but I don't think at the time, number one, Twitter did not have the technological mechanisms to add, fact checking notes and necessarily not as much as Facebook did at the time. And so you saw the fact checks on there, but it wasn't like as embedded in the system as it was on Facebook. And so it just seems like he's just really playing ball with whoever's in office. So already off on a bad start here, there, Mr. Zuckerberg.
So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US.
Okay. So this is interesting because community notes is actually a pretty neat thing. I do enjoy it. But I think I think we need to be careful with this because community notes is driven by the community. So what does that mean? That means if you are deemed this is much different than Facebook or the government saying, "Hey, we disagree with what you say." It's the crowd doing it. And not just the crowd, but whoever's been permitted to be part of that particular community, the community notes. So on Twitter, not just anybody can be a community notes editor. You have to be approved, and I'm not particularly familiar with the process. And so it is a limited number of people. So it's not like a democratic style where you just say, okay, the crowd disagrees or the crowd believes. It's going to be the specific group of people that have access to it. And they may vary. Like, again, I don't know. I think I did sign up to be part of the community notes team. I don't think I ever got a response back from Twitter, oddly enough. So yeah, he seems like he's starting off and he's like, we're gonna do to Facebook what was done to Twitter, which kind of sounds nice, but I think there's some concern that we're gonna address here in a minute.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So, over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second,
I want to point out it's actually going to be cheaper, I assume, because somebody's paying these fact checkers. Who's paying them? Is it Facebook? I assume Facebook. Again, I'm making a speculation. So what I think was probably going on is that the fact checkers were getting paid by Facebook. Hey, we'll fact check post on your, we'll fact check so many posts. That's probably what it is, and probably why satire got fact checked, right? Because they probably made an estimate and said, we, based on this sample, based on some research that we've done, we've determined that for every 100 posts, this many of them are have need to be fact checked. And so therefore we will pay you X amount of dollars and you need to deliver this many fact checks. And then I assume that they went out and they found easy picking stuff. And some of that would be satire from the Babylon Bee. So and again, I acknowledge I could be wrong on this, but I think it's very similar to what we see with the quotas that we talk about with the police. Like, hey, I've got to get so many speeding tickets in or whatever, like, the quotas that we talk about. So I think it's probably similar to that, is that there's an expectation that there are so many, and if you are tasked with dealing with it, then you need to deliver on so many. And that makes sense, right? Like that's how I would run a system. If I would be like, oh, I'm going to pay you to do this. Well, I'm going to pay you to do so much work, right? And then I need you to show me the work. But I bet that Facebook didn't put down any significant requirements, which is why we saw like memes and jokes and stuff like that getting fact checked left and right, because those are the ones that tend to go more viral. Sometimes bad information or a bad video or something like that, sometimes those do go viral, but the memes and the jokes tend to go viral more often. So low hanging fruit. All right, let's see what he got for number 2.
We're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms.
So one of the things that I pointed out in the early days of Twitter when Elon Musk took over and he said, "Hey, we're going to have all this freedom of speech," is, and this is kind of me getting into my conspiracy side, right? I said, it feels weird. Like, why all of a sudden this guy, why does he care so much? Now, for me, when I look at a billionaire, I think of somebody who is out there trying to radically change something. They're basically trying to impose their vision on the world. And that vision could be crazy, could be wild, but that's their sole focus. And they will hone in and and focus on that relentlessly. And so I was like, what are we not being told? What is it just free speech or is there something more? Is free speech an end to a means that he's trying to accomplish? That's what I believe Elon Musk is up to. And so I was like, it seems really weird that all of a sudden now you can just say anything and it's cool. Right. And so I was like, well, maybe because he talked a lot about AI as well. I said, maybe AI is now doing a lot of the moderation and maybe we are training that AI to do the moderation, right? We are basically training it to identify what what is the community saying, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, because AI can scour through and basically think of like 100,000 users. AI can review all of that and look for patterns. And then once it identifies a pattern, it can say this is the new community standard. And so it can do a lot of fact checking for us, right? Because it could say, all right, does this match the facts? But does this match the community as well? And so it could even fact check the community notes in the future. I don't think it is now, right? So I'm a little hesitant here. I really am because, like, yeah, we should be able to talk about immigration and anything, right? Like nothing should be like if as Musk has said, that Twitter is the town square. Well, think about a town square. Think about if you go downtown to the local park. It's not really a town square, but let's say you go to the park and you meet 4 or 5 people there. I go to a park, I take my son and I meet some other parents there. And we just start talking. We're allowed to talk about it whatever we want. Anything we want. Right? Like that's how it would be. And there's no restrictions, no limitations. Now, if I'm down there talking to them and then I bring up something and, maybe the other parents want to talk about how well the kids play together and I'm like, "Yeah, but Trump." They might go, dude, we're not talking about Trump, right?" And so now if the public square is digital, well, now, yes, I can talk about these things. I can bring up Trump in an unrelated conversation, but I can also be penalized, which we'll get to in just a second.
Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action.
Okay. So it used to be on Twitter that like they would tell you to block people quickly because if you didn't block people, then what might happen is somebody with a large account who has a large number of followers may basically go after you and initiate this group attack, and they could all report you. And then so now Twitter gets a whole bunch of reports about a tweet that maybe I made, and so now they have to act. Same concept here. So it sounds really a lot like Musk and Zuckerberg are creating systems where we tell on each other. Okay, just keep that in mind.
The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fourth, we're bringing back.
So, again, the future censorship will be in the hands of your fellow citizens. Just pointing that out. That's this new approach to policy enforcement, which is what we kind of see on X. And there's a little bit more to it, and we'll talk more about that in a second.
Civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump.
So let me pause here and just point out that he said they are going to move their teams, their trust and safety and content moderation teams, not remove them. They're moving them. So they will still be there. Okay? They're going to have some job to do, whatever that is. So he's talked about like, hey, you know what? We've been a little bit too tight. The systems that we've had have been, they've been allowed to take too much stuff down. People do want to have these conversations, but now we're going to institute a system that we're only going to, our automated systems, our teams are only going to focus on high priority stuff, like the worst of the worst. And then it sounds, and he didn't really explicitly say this, but it sounds like he said that they're going to allow the community to drive what they take down from that point forward. So the community, if the community complains enough about something, then they will address it. Maybe they'll put a tag on it. Maybe they'll remove it. Maybe they'll, like Twitter, they'll demonetize you. Like there's any number of things that could happen. So that's his big major plan. And it sounds good, but I think people should be weary about this. I mean, I want you to think about it. Like, think about something. You know what? Hold on. Let me play a little bit more before we get into that. Let me play a couple more seconds.
Push back on governments around the world. They're going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government.
Now, that's funny, because you might remember that the US government played a role in some of this censorship in the US. Like he's pointing at the Europe and Latin American countries and China, but it happened here too. Remember the Twitter files that came out and showed that Twitter was basically taking direction from the FBI? I mean, all right, so that's, hey, the governments have been bad, but we need government to help us. Okay.
And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship.
There it is.
By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further.
So I kind of understand what he's saying here. Like, let's make sure we're having an honest conversation. He's saying, like, look, the government, the US government, they played a role, and that made it easier for other governments to do it as well. Because, like, if America, of all places, who happens to have very strong ideas about freedom of speech, if America allows its government to limit speech, well, then that's kind of like when if other countries are looking at America, that's almost a license in a sense. Like, hey, America's doing it, and they're all about free speech. So don't be surprised that we do it, right? Because we're not all about free speech, maybe, right? Depending on the country. And so, so I understand what he's saying. And so, like, the reverse would be, okay, well, if the U.S. government helped broaden these restrictions, then the US government can help reduce these restrictions. However, keep in mind that the US government did it by implementing it. So the only thing that the US government needs to really do is nothing. The US government can say, hey, look, we're backing off on this altogether. And then other governments can go, okay, well, now we can't point toward the United States government as an example or a justification or anything. So therefore now we have to deal with it with our people based on our culture, our laws, and so on and so forth. Like we can't even point to them and say, hey, they're doing it here. This is a good idea. And America's the land of the free, blah, 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 blah. Right. So that's where we are. Okay, let's continue.
Now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
All right. So we're going to give people a voice, is what he says. Well, what does that mean? Well, it sounds like he's going to use Twitter as his example. Now, the conspiracy guy in me says that this was not an accident. That but I don't go as far as saying like it's all planned out and people are scheming and they knew that we were going to be at this moment today and they're waiting for it and then they're going to implement this, whoever they are, like the Bilderbergs or whoever, right? The WEF, whatever, the Illuminati. So, what I think is more happening is that governments are prone to limit speech, limit anything really. That's what they have an incentive to do. And the way they were going about it created a backlash. So, what do you do when you want to accomplish something, but the way that you're doing it gives you a backlash? You try something else, you do something different. So, that something different could simply be, hey, let's open it up and let's see if we can't limit or curtail speech through another form. Now, before we get into that, let me look at some comments. We want to take a little moment here for some comments. You know, so let's see what we got here. And again, I can't put them on the screen just yet. I'm still working on that. I'll try to get that figured out. So from YouTube, that Liberty Lady says it's interesting about Dana White being brought into Meta, and now Zuck wants to change. You know, I think we should pay attention to everybody that gets brought into a company, what their role is, what their history is. So, for instance, and we're going to see a video in just a minute. Linda Yaccarino, I think is her name. She's over at X, and I got a video with her and Elon Musk, and she's asking some questions, and she came to him, and she has some involvement with the World Economic Forum. Now, again, I will engage in some conspiracies, but I'm not going to engage in conspiracy to the level where I act like it's all planned. I think it's more opportunistic. And so basically, you have a general goal of controlling people, and then you look for opportunities as opposed to groups of people getting together in, dark rooms and, holding their hands together as they laugh and snicker. Like I don't and scheme and plot. Like I don't think that's how it works out. But that's kind of how most conspiracies are presented. And that's, so like on one hand, the conspiracies tend to have like some nuggets of truth to them. But then in order to accept the conspiracy as a whole, you've got to accept this foundation where people are scheming on purpose and everything is planned and laid out. But the only people that know about it are the people who are scheming and the very handful of people that have supposedly figured it out. But when they present the idea to you, there's a lot of holes. So I'm not there. I'm not on board with that. All right. What else we got? Keith Garrett says, centralized systems provide an easy way to censor, which is why I tend to avoid them. Trade-offs. Yep. Everything is a trade-off. It all is a trade-off. And I guess the point of my show today is to talk about the trade-off a little bit, but also talk about I don't think that leaders, people that we elect, people that basically run the world, whether they're elected representatives or whether they're people with power like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and other people who own major companies. I don't think that these folks necessarily have changed their tune. I don't think that they are any more open to free speech than they were 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Um, I think that in some cases, they're the same, whatever that means. And in other cases, they may have come around that, hey, certain levels of free speech may be advantageous in to their goals, in like such as the case of Elon Musk. All right. So let's continue on. So let's hear from Musk about what he said about 2 years ago when he was talking about freedom of speech. This is a very short clip. So let me play this real quick. Video number 2. There.
So the bedrock of democracy, I would imagine, is important to everyone in this room. And you talk about the importance of freedom of speech. Yesterday, you posted a new policy that was titled Freedom of Speech, Not Freedom of Reach. That got my attention.
Yes.
Tell us about your new policy.
Right. So freedom of speech, not reach, is important in that, like if somebody has something hateful to say, it doesn't mean you should give them a megaphone. They should still be able to say it, but it needs to be not then pushed on people. So if, you can go like in Times Square in New York, and you can hear people say all kinds of crazy things. That's fine, but we don't broadcast that to Earth. So if somebody wants to say something that's technically legal, but is, by most definitions, hateful, we're not going to promote that to people. We're not going to recommend hateful content to people. We'll put that behind a warning label saying this speech is probably something you don't want. So, and now this is something we have to be very careful that we roll out, and that it does not become what is intended to be good does not become bad. So we want to be delicate with the freedom of reach, not speech, freedom of speech, not reach. So we're taking it easy, but it's just, if people are saying things that are, making you sad or encouraging negativity, then we're not going to amplify that, which Twitter has done in the past.
Okay. So today, moving forward, now they talk about like, let me back up. Since then, Musk has encouraged people to speak freely, along with encouraging people to pay the platform. So you can sign up and be a verified account or some amount of money. There's like 2 levels. There's premium and premium plus, and you get features with them, right? I'm a verified member, a premium member. And then he's also implemented this system where if you have enough engagement with your account, a certain level, then you can get paid by Twitter. But then they also have this subscribe button where like I could set up if I qualify, I could set up a subscribe button and you could pay me, let's say $1 a month. You might say, I really like Dale's content on social media, so I'm going to pay him $1 a month. Well, here's the thing. Since then, users have been demonetized, and even including payment between individuals. So what does this mean? So I want you to imagine that I have a big, huge account and you follow me, but you're also a subscriber. That means maybe you pay me that $1 a month because you like my content. So if I go too far, because as he pointed out, they still have to have some guardrails, some limitations. So if there's that freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. So like I don't get to, they won't recommend my content necessarily. It may not show up when people are scrolling through and seeing, what's in my for you, like they have that column that says for you, like what does the algorithm want to show me? Well, what he said is they're going to limit what the algorithm might show you from me if I've been deemed to be a bad account. So but now it goes further, and there have been users um, who are now limited on the payments, not just from X, which would make sense, right? But also from subscribers. So there are people that have lost their subscriptions. There are people that have lost their verified check, even though they're paying for it, right? And then they've also lost their payments from X. So three things. Now that's a problem for me because number one, that's not really what was advertised. Number two, if I'm a user and I'm paying you for a blue check and you take it away, then like, was that the initial agreement? Is that I would pay you, but it was contingent on whether or not, on the level of speech that I use. And there's some pretty foul things. I'll acknowledge there are foul things out there. But then and so while it might make sense to say, okay, well, X is not going to pay somebody who is saying very nasty things, because maybe the advertisers don't want their money going to that, and that's completely fair. I think it's a problem to remove their check mark, which sounds silly, but you can think of it as like social standing in a sense. People know that if you have a blue check, you're paying Twitter, you get all these additional features, your replies are getting bumped up. So if they remove it, then it sends a signal to other users of where you are. So you can almost think of it as like a digital class, right? You got the people that are willing to pay or can pay, and then you have the people that are unwilling to pay or cannot pay. And so, and I don't have a problem with that. Like, I'm not going to get into this like, oh, class warfare, blah blah. But there is a distinction. It's more than just, hey, I got a blue check. It sends a signal to other users. And so now I might be paying Twitter to send that signal, and they've removed my signal. So for me, that's a bit fraudulent. The other thing is if you're paying me monthly, well, then you're saying, DL, I like your content and I want to pay you for it. But if Twitter comes along or any company and says, well, no, you can't pay DL because he said some very nasty things recently, and so he's grounded. Okay. Well, that's more than just freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Because think of it like a contract between you and I. You said, DL, I want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I want you to keep doing it so much that I will give you money for it. Right. So you're paying me. And so now, I mean, yes, there are other ways to pay me. You could go to PayPal, you could go to Patreon, there's any number, buy me a coffee. There's all kind of platforms. But if the major platforms are doing this, the smaller ones are right behind them. And we've seen that. Like, we're seeing it now. Twitter did a thing. Now Facebook is doing a thing that's going to impact Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, right? And we'll see other platforms follow suit as well as these things become more popular. So it's not like it's just limited there. So it wouldn't be it would not be, it's not really a conspiracy to say if Twitter stops the payment between you and I, then so will PayPal or Patreon or any number of other ones, especially the smaller ones, right? Especially if we have a broader conversation about banks and their limitations. That's a whole different conversation. So I'm not so sure that we're going to get what we think we're getting. Now, don't get me wrong. Platforms, they can operate however they choose, even inconsistently. But as a user, I can object. In fact, I'm paying Twitter. So like, if you want to go that route, I have a voice to say, that's not what I'm paying you for. I'm not paying you. Like, I'm paying you to support a platform that does a thing like that. And that's what a lot of people did. A lot of people said, I'm going to pay for a blue check because I like the platform with a paid model where I can drive how it functions, and I can, do these things, and I can say what I want, and my replies and my post can get boosted and all that good stuff, right? We're basically paying for a product. It's no different than if I go to the store and I buy a candy bar. I'm paying for a particular product that has particular features. It's got to have chocolate in it. Maybe it's got to have almonds, maybe it's got to be sugar free, whatever the case is, right? Like I'm paying for a specific thing. And if all of a sudden you give me something else, you're not giving me what I've paid for. So I think there's a bit of concern here. Now, if they, I can object and I should, because inconsistent for others means inconsistent for me, or it could be. It's always possible that it stops at the worst of the worst, which is where it hits always. It always starts with the worst of the worst. And some of the people that have been demonetized, when you look at some of their posts, they're pretty vile. You're like, wow, okay, I kind of understand why you got demonetized. And again, if we're just talking about Twitter is no longer paying that person and saying, hey, look, you went too far and we're not paying for you for that. We're not going to give you a payout because our advertisers don't want to pay for that kind of speech. That's fine, because that's basically between you and the user. If you want to change the rules on what a blue check is, then you need to change the rules and say, hey, we can and will remove your blue check if if you take speech to this level, right? Or if you do these things. And maybe it's in there. It might be in there. Maybe I just didn't read it, right? And maybe nobody read it, right? Like nobody really reads the terms of the end user agreement. So so how does this apply to Facebook? Well, let's listen to this clip from Georgetown. Now, what I did, the full clip would be about 6 minutes long, but I could not play that, so I'm gonna truncated it a little. So in the middle, it'll kind of shift gears. It should make sense nonetheless, and it should make the point. So let me play this video clip here. All right, where are we? Boom.
We are at another crossroads. We can either continue to stand for free expression, understanding its messiness, but believing that the long journey towards greater progress requires confronting ideas that challenge us. Or we can decide that the cost is simply too great. And I'm here today because I believe that we must continue to stand for free expression.
Okay, so again, this was 5 years ago. Now, 5 years ago, Facebook was not really much for free expression. Not at all. And it really got bad in the following years after that, because 5 years ago would have been about 2020, right? I have to look and see the exact date of this particular speech, but it was somewhere around 2019, 2020. And then we got into COVID, and then things really got bad, because if you were trying to, criticize the policies or say, hey, I disagree with, this medical advice, blah, 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 like you got pulled quick. Right. And Facebook was one of the worst. YouTube was another. Depending on how you want to look at it, one or both of them were worse or equal. All right, let's continue.
Now, at the same time, I know that free expression has never been absolute. Right? There are some people who argue that internet platforms should allow all expression that is protected under the First Amendment, even though the First Amendment explicitly doesn't apply to companies.
So let me address that. I actually don't believe that. I do believe it should be transparent, but I don't believe that they have an obligation to let any amount of free speech as protected under the First Amendment. And the courts have ruled that free speech is more than just criticizing your government, more than just political speech. It can be like pornography is considered free speech, whether you like it or not. So I personally am not a fan of logging on to, like, I remember back in the days, I would follow some libertarians who were, and I didn't realize they were sex workers. And then like all of a sudden I'm scrolling at work, at my job, and I'm just like on my lunch break scrolling, and all of a sudden I see, a naked body pop up all over my screen. I'm like, whoa, what the heck? So I started muting people, because I'm like, all right, like I didn't realize you were a sex worker, and I didn't realize you were using this platform to promote some of that stuff. But I mean, like, so for me, I'm okay with some limitations. So, as long as it's transparent, and as long as it's not at all coming from the government. The government cannot, like, unless we're talking. So I have some exceptions there. Child exploitation. Yeah, that one, fine. If the government says, hey, you know what? You're not allowed to exploit children, and anybody that promotes it or has it, or whatever, you're going to get in trouble, including Facebook. That's cool. Why? Because children cannot consent. But when we get into the issue of consenting adults, right? Then all of a sudden that changes. Now the government has no business directing anything. The government, in my opinion, must stop at we are only simply we are implementing rules and regulations and laws that explicitly protect the rights of people, and we're going to focus more on people that cannot consent, children, because for people that can consent, it gets much broader, right? So for instance, if I want to get into a boxing ring, let's see, who's in my, let's say Joe Hanoush, one of the guys in the chat right now. Let's say him and I want to have a boxing match. Well, he's an adult and I'm an adult. So we can decide, hey, let's have a boxing match. We'll get in a ring. It'll go 3 rounds, 10 rounds, whatever. Here are the rules that we're both going to agree to. And then we go and duke it out, maybe for charity, maybe just because we hate each other. We don't. But, for whatever. But we can consent to that. However, my son is 5. He cannot consent to a boxing match, not with me, not with another 5-year-old, right? Because like the nature of boxing. So therefore, and I mean like a serious boxing match. I don't mean like going to jujitsu or some training course or something like that. But I mean an actual like get in the ring and like try to knock each other out. Like he really can't consent to that. And so I think it's okay to have that limitation from government on children, but not on adults. So hopefully that clears up exactly where I stand on this matter. All right. So Joe Hanu says DL picking on me because he knows I can. I can't even carry a tent. So you said that I didn't, and he did just fine. That's kind of an insider joke, or insider information. We had to carry some equipment for a very long distance, and it was raining and we were all tired. Anyway, everybody did fine that day. It was great. All right, so let's continue on with Zuckerberg.
But more broadly, we've actually found that a different strategy works best. And that is focusing on the authenticity of the speaker rather than trying to judge the content itself. Much of the content that those Russian accounts shared was distasteful, but it would have been considered permissible political discourse if it had been shared by real American citizens. So the real issue is that it was posted by fake accounts that were coordinating together and pretending to be people that they were not. And we've seen similar issues with these groups that pump out misinformation like spam just to make money. So the solution here is to verify the identities of anyone who's getting a wide amount of distribution and to get a lot better at identifying and taking down fake accounts.
Oh, so that's interesting because that's exactly what Twitter is doing effectively. They have, like, to get a verified account, one of 2 things has to happen. I believe that I saw somewhere that if your account is large enough that you will just get a blue check. But otherwise, if you want that blue check, which comes with all those benefits, then you have to pay for it. In order to pay for it, you also have to verify your identity. Now, you can still be anonymous. So you can have a paid account and have an anonymous account, right? Cat Turd, those guys. But you have to verify it at least with the platform. And that's kind of interesting because Mark Zuckerberg was talking about this 5 years ago. And that's what happened to Twitter. But it was after that. Because Twitter has only been purchased by Elon with this particular system for a couple of years now. But this was 5 years ago. So it kind of makes me think like maybe the tech giants were already talking about this direction a long time ago. And if they were, well, how come we're just now kind of finding out about it? Like, in a sense, like it wasn't really widespread conversation. Like, hey, 2 and 2, Zuckerberg was talking about it. Now Elon Musk did it. And now Zuckerberg is talking about changing his system. So it kind of makes me, the conspiracy guy in me says, maybe Musk was the test run, right? Maybe. And again, I don't think that people were sitting around scheming, but that doesn't mean that they weren't sitting around thinking like, how can we do this differently? Like it's not being well received. How do we do it so that it's better received? So we get what we want, people get what they want effectively.
So we now require you to provide a government ID and to prove your location if you want to run political ads or if you're going to run a large page. You can still say controversial things if you want, but you have to stand behind them with your real identity and face accountability. Our AI systems have also got.
So that was my conspiracy side saying like, hey, but then the other side might say, well, actually, Mark Zuckerberg implemented this first, right? If you want to be a political entity, if you want to be a specific type of entity like advertising on Facebook, then you have to do these things. And so then you could look and say, well, Elon Musk just took the opportunity and said, you know what? Why don't we apply that to pretty much everyone? And then now you have Zuckerberg saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we should do that too. Maybe we should take it further. So maybe, again, I don't believe in this sitting around in a dark room scheming, but I do believe that there is opportunism happening. And I think we can, when you look at the evidence, you kind of see where somebody creates an idea, another person seems to bounce off of it. And then, that idea gets bounced off of, and then we move forward. Continue.
I'm a lot more advanced at detecting clusters of fake accounts that aren't behaving the way that people would. So we now remove billions of fake accounts a year, mostly within minutes of signing up and before they really have a chance to do very much.
So that's kind of interesting. Like they've just signed up and they get removed and you know about it and you know that this is a fake account. How do you know it's a fake account? They haven't done anything. So that means they have to be getting some information elsewhere about this account or how it got signed up, right? And you know how integrated Facebook is, like you go to, it's integrated all over the place. So we've all had the running jokes of like, there I am with my friends talking about buying underwear. I don't know why I'd be talking about buying underwear with my friends, but let's say I was. And then all of a sudden I jump on Facebook and I see an ad for underwear and I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. Like how'd that happen? Right. So it seems like AI now is really in the direction is to really verify who is who. It's interesting. Why would you do that? I have no idea. Or do I?
So focusing on authenticity and verifying counts has been a much better solution than an ever-expanding definition of what is and is not harmful content.
Okay. So it probably does work better, right? Like I mean, like there are some real arguments to be made here. It's not like they're just all BS arguments like, oh, they're trying to come get us and put us all in a camp. I don't think that's necessarily it. But I do think that there's a combination of some ideas simply work better. Okay. How do we moderate a platform? Well, moderating it by topic and by what people are saying is probably not a good idea, as we've already seen. So what's the next best idea? Well, the next best idea might be to, okay, let's validate who the person is. And then we can take it a step further and say, all right, well, maybe you want to get paid on this platform. Since you're on here all day anyway, you might as well get paid, right? That's an incentive and very attractive one. And so then they might say, okay, well, if you are spreading too much garbage, really bad stuff, then maybe we'll limit that payment a little bit. Maybe you don't need to get paid, right? And then now Elon Musk is like, I saw him come out recently and he said, he was talking about having some sort of banking system. And people were like, well, wait a minute. If you're going to get demonetized for saying stuff and your banking system is included, because that's what he wants X to be. He wants X to be basically the everything. We basically live in X. We get our news in X. We get paid in X. We maybe make transactions, like PayPal. Maybe we have a bank account with X, whatever, right? All of that stuff. He wants it to be very, very inclusive of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. But again, looking at what's happening already, it seems like we're setting ourselves up to have our speech curtailed by our fellow citizens and have it impact on a financial scale. What does that kind of sound like? That's a scary set of words, but social credit score. That's exactly what it sounds like. Did you watch Black Mirror, the episode Nosedive? Go watch it if you haven't. I think it's still on Netflix. But here's the summary. A girl has a low, a medium level social credit score. And somehow she gets invited to a wedding by somebody she knew in high school who happens to have a very nice credit score. And she's excited about going because she's been trying to raise her credit score, her social score, so that she could rent or buy a home. But buying that home in that particular neighborhood requires a certain score. And so she wanted to be able to buy that. And then so she's been trying to, so she goes around, she's at the coffee shop and she's like, it's kind of goofy because she's like holding her phone, and she's like, why, thank you so much. And then she kind of looks at the guy and the guy's like, he grabs his phone and he basically gives her a little point like, yeah, that was a good interaction. Right. And that goes toward her score. And so she's trying to raise her score. And then she gets this invite and then she's excited because she's like, oh, great. Now I can be around all these people that have a much higher score than me, which is going to add to my score. Because if somebody with a higher score gives you a kudos, then that's going to be more meaningful than somebody with a lower score. And then she runs into all these mishaps and it ends up that she basically plummets instead of goes up. So that's the story. So I think that's the world that we're going to, where you have the community who is going to be driving this and saying, no, that's terrible. We don't like that. And then you have this system where you can be demonetized. And so then the question is, if you can be demonetized now, even from subscribers, what else could happen if they have your banking system included as well? If we know that our phones are listening to us and then showing us advertisements, right? Now, if you don't believe me that it could really be driven on a monetary or financial basis, let me show you this final picture because I think this final picture says it all. So here it is. So you might remember this. This is Alex Jones getting in trouble. So let me see here. Where's my? So this is from 2022. Alex Jones ordered to pay $965 million for Sandy Hook lies. Okay, so he got fined, civil fine for almost $1 billion and he said some nasty things about Sandy Hook. He went around saying they were actors and it didn't really happen and all this other stuff, right? Which I would agree is free speech and he can say it, but he got fined for it. And let me tell you, $1 billion, and it might have gotten knocked down since then. I can't remember exactly, but the initial fine of $1 billion, that doesn't make anybody's pain go away. That doesn't do anything. It might make them shut up, but that's about it, right? It doesn't solve anything that he said. But underneath the headline, the sub headline, that's what I think is interesting because this is from 2022. It says, until the political right purges this movement from its ranks, none of this ends, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut said after the verdict. So in 2022, we had a senator, a Congress member, say, hey, now he was talking specifically about the right, but he was specifically saying, we're going to continue using money as a string to control you. And now look at our systems that we have on social media. That's kind of where they're going. And it very much seems like the beginnings of a social credit score. So I anticipate that's what we're getting. And we're just walking right in. Like for me, I have said things like Elon Musk is like a Pied Piper, leading us right on there. Now, is that to say that he's leading us to the worst that I can think of? No, not necessarily. Because again, these kind of things get built on, they transform, right? Because somebody has some idea of how it might be further implemented. I mean, think about law, right? Like somebody says, "Hey, you can't burn the American flag," and then we go to court and they say, "Okay, yeah, you actually can burn the American flag." Okay, cool. And then then somebody might say, "Well, you can't burn the gay flag, the pride flag." Somebody might say, "Well, based on you know prior court case, you actually can because that's also freedom of speech." And so if it ends up in court might say, "Well, you know what? Based on history, based on what was previously decided, yeah, you can." So they've expanded it, right? And I think that's really how it plays out. We just keep expanding on an idea and we have no sense of when to stop. And you don't see that. You don't see like, hey, stop, we're done right here, and don't take it any further. You need a completely new idea. We're done. That doesn't happen. It's always expanded, built upon, or transformed in some way to do more of what it was already doing. So I say, buyer beware. That's what I say. Buyer beware. I would like, yeah, when Facebook opens up, should people get on there and do everything that they did on Twitter and, drop the N word all the time and say all these other, I would advise you not to, because I think that's I think that we could potentially see a social credit score that looks back and says, well, now we know how you behave. We know who you are. We know how you believe. We know your true thoughts because you foolishly gave them to us. And it's not the public square, because if I go to the park or the public square and I tell somebody something, let's say I go down there and I go, man, that Donald Trump, um, he's got diabetes. I don't really know that, but let's say I say that, right? And well, there may, like, unless somebody records me, there's no record of it. But if I get on social media and I say, man, that Donald Trump has diabetes, and then I say something else later on and something else and something else, well, now the AI systems and the history can look back and say, man, you've got a record DL of saying untrue things. Maybe, maybe we should use our systems to kind of point you in a better direction. So that's what I got to say about that. Let me look at some comments and then we'll head on out of here. Let's see. Let's see here. Keith Garrett says private companies can can do whatever you want. The government should not be involved. Leave it to the free market. I agree, but I'm not so convinced that it's really fully in the free market. And what I mean by that is that the full free market might mean that Twitter and Facebook do similar things, but in some ways look entirely different. Or it could mean that they do the same thing because, hey, it worked over here. Let's do it over here. Right. Um, but is it really, the free market if we're driving and the users, their say is really more about limiting other people than it is about opening up more freedom? And that's my concern. I don't know that we're going to lead to more freedom, more opportunities. I think we're going to end up boxing ourselves in through this idea that we're operating under the free market. Let's see what else. Um, Jake K says Zuckerberg could be doing this because of a new admin, but sometimes people can change. We'll see. I agree. But here's my thing. Jake. I'm concerned that he hasn't changed because we haven't, like, we elected Trump. Yes. But Trump is it's starting to look like he's the same old Trump. So he hasn't really changed. He maybe has changed some of the people that he's put around, but he seems to have some of the same attitudes and behaviors with a little bit of change, but not really dramatically. But then we didn't really have anything dramatic after that. There was no like, man, look at all these new grassroots, representatives elected to Congress. And I don't think we're going to see that in the midterms either. I think we're going to see the same old, same old. And if you want evidence of that, go look at Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson got Speaker of the House, right? After all this hullabaloo, and they voted him in, right? Despite his record. So for me, it's the same old, same old. And if I don't see it out of the government, and we know that the government puts its hands into the free market in some way, then I'm not so sure that we're going to get something new out of the free market, something that it should be. So that's my big concern. And then Keith Garrett says at some point people started confusing online personas with real people. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of that is because there's a payment model, right? Like if you can say something, and right now it's kind of frustrating on social media, on Twitter, because like a lot of people will complain about it, but so far it seems to be still valuable, a value add to people. So let me rephrase that so it sounds a little bit less confusing. So a lot of the users are complaining about it, but there still are other users who are implementing these types of posts that generate a lot of engagement, but are just really low quality posts to begin with. And so it right now is encouraging that behavior, even though a lot of people don't like it. It's another reason why I'm not so convinced that we're fully in a free market, because it's still being driven by the system. The system is driving it, not really the users. And I'm not sure that you could ever have a system that is driven entirely by the users, because again, the leaders have explicitly said these are some of the things that we're going to limit, these are some of the things that we're going to do, and we're kicking out the fact checkers, but we're replacing it with the community. So you're still going to have just kind of like a slight variation of these systems. So for me, I think that a lot of people, going back to Keith's point here, they, right now they're engaging in what pays. So that may not even be their true persona. Like, you see somebody and they post all this kind of stuff. It may just be for engagement, not because that's who they are and what they really believe. So that's what I got to say about that. All right, folks, let's end this show. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. By the way, I'm always looking for, hit that button too quick. That's okay. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. So if you know a dad or you are a dad, reach out. I want to bring you on the show. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel at youtube.libertydad.com or my Rumble channel at rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Also, make sure that you go to libertydad.locals.com. That's where you can sign up to be part of my locals community. And if you want to help drive this show, you want to have more input into the topics that I talk about, or, whether it's a video, whether it's, some event that's happening, whether it's a meme, whether it's just a topic and you're like, hey, DL, I would like you to explore more about this from a libertarian perspective. Go there. Let's start having conversations. Sign up. It's $5 a month. Also included with all of that, I will be doing monthly like Q&A or just community sessions that will be for locals subscribers only. So make sure you go to locals.libertydad.com. All right. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.